if they want to. Talk don't bother me. I want the whole wide world to know that
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRIenzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Marie Moosy.
And our guest, Elissa Stein, the author of this book, Flow, which we're going to discuss. It's a book about the cultural history or the cultural story of menstruation. And I know many people are fascinated by this subject, and you know, many men are very fascinated by this subject.
I didn't know that.
But definitely, women are definitely fascinated by this subject.
Well, it's a good part of your life,
right.
So.
Well, I think one of the most difficult things in a man's life is the first time his girlfriend or wife or, I don't know, mother for that matter, sends him to the pharmacy to buy Tampax.
Yes. It's hard enough for women to do it for themselves, but to have a man do it.
Right.
But what I've found so far with the book is that men are actually far more interested than I would have thought. I have more male followers on Twitter and on Facebook whose enthusiasm and excitement about the project and support for this, because they don't ever get to talk about it. So this is finally a time where they can ask questions, learn about things, and sort of talk about experiences that they had or they wondered, or questions that were never answered because nobody would give them an answer.
Like,
so now
what
they have
is
a chance.
it?
Like, what is it? What is
Well,
it
they do
feel
separate men and women, for instance, when they tell girls in school
In the
about
fifth grade
menstruation.
film, yes.
Yes, and the Kotex company's little gift pack.
Well, is that how it happens?
Then they separate the boys and
Right.
the girls go see this movie and get their little,
Right.
you know, goodie bag, and then
Well,
I don't know
remember
what they
being,
do with the guys.
I was in 7th grade in Catholic school, and we would sit in the bathroom, the boys' room, and pass around the wildest stories as fact that you ever. I wouldn't even go into the bizarre ideas that people had, the boys had, of what it was, where it came from, where it went, what it was about. Nobody had the slightest, foggiest idea, at least when I was 12 years old.
Well, that's one of the fascinating things that we talk about in this book, is that before science and research and medicine, and when people didn't know what it was, the stories that they came up with, thinking that this was the truth, are fascinating. People used to think that menstrual blood inside was what a baby was, and that's what grew into a baby. So every time a woman got her period, it was an actual dead baby that didn't make it to life. And so it was this really serious period of mourning. And it was only, you know, the woman carried sort of like the clay, and it was only when a man's sperm was mixed with it and brought it to life that's what life came from. The woman was just sort of the machine that...
The conduit.
Right, the conduit, the machine that put it together and that housed it. But it was the man that brought the life and made the whole thing coalesce into a person.
Right. By the way, we are live, so if there's anybody out there who wants to call and has a comment, we will be a little bit adventurous, and we'll take your calls and we'll try it out. So I want to give folks an opportunity to learn about the book. Tell us a little bit about your website and how the making of the book.
Oh, sure. I had this idea about 15 years ago, that there was nothing out there for women who had questions. And it came from a period in my life when my period stopped. And I was terrified and didn't know what to do. And I was too embarrassed and ashamed to talk to anybody about it. So it went on for a year until finally I told my therapist about it, who said, "You've got to go to a doctor right away." And she sent me to somebody, and he did all kinds of testing and sonograms, and he said I was fine, and he patted me on the knee, and he literally said, "Honey, we need to jumpstart your hormones."
Oh, dear.
Which was so dismissive. And he handed me a pack of birth control pills, which I didn't want to take, and sent me on my way. And I walked out of the office feeling like nobody bothered to find out what was wrong with me. Why did it stop? There was a reason, but nobody looked any further than that. And I took the pills for a while, and my period came back, because that's what they do. They mimic a period. It's not really a period. And when I stopped taking them again, it stopped. And so my husband did all kinds of research, and I ended up taking this herb called Dong Quai. And after that, my body has worked fine. But it really struck me at how women are treated in this very dismissive, offhand way. And that something that's so important and personal isn't treated that way by the medical community, by other women, by ourselves.
Well, isn't it interesting that most of women's passages are treated as a disease? I mean, menopause certainly is.
Yes.
And it's not a disease. Menstruation is not a disease,
Or
but
something
it's
to joke
treated
about.
as a disease. And
Yeah, that there's something wrong with you. And another fascinating thing that we discovered while researching this book is the language that surrounds menstruation, because it's exactly what you said, that it's this hygienic problem. You know, when they talk about feminine hygiene, that's a made-up term that some ad agency people came up with, because if you can convince somebody that there's something wrong and something that's dirty or unsanitary or needs to be fixed, that's a really great way to sell products.
To have a product to meet that need.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Oh, right,
yeah.
exactly. And it sells very well on radio and
Now,
television.
speaking of advertising, your book is filled with some of the most amazing ads.
You're right, I'm seeing it right
How
now.
far
It's
back
amazing.
do you go?
We have the very first Kotex ad
Oh,
that was
wow.
ever done in 1920.
Wow.
And here's an interesting thing. The people after the show will be able to go to cocktail parties and throw things down that are so interesting. But Kotex was developed from leftover bandage material from World War I. Somebody invented this stuff called cellulose that absorbed blood better. And some nurses in France used it when they had their periods, and then after the war was over, they had warehouses full of this stuff. And so somebody said, oh, why don't we package this? And that's how Kotex came into being.
Wow.
If
What
it
did
wasn't for that, who knows if
What
anything
did
like that
people
would have
do
developed.
before Kotex was invented?
That's a really good question.
What did you do?
It was really hard to find information about this because nobody talked about it, nobody wrote about it, nobody chronicled it. As with so many things
Yes.
about women's history, women used rags, women would pin things into skirts, women would use nothing. That was a big thing we read about factories where they'd have straw on the floor and they would
Oh,
sweep it
just
out at the end
drip,
of the day.
yeah.
In the book there's something called a sanitary apron, and women would tie this rubber thing around their waists and then the blood would just sort of drip down the back. I don't know where it went after that. But there was a company, and that's what they produced. It was rubber bloomers and rubber aprons for women to wear, and that's why people wore so many petticoats and layers under things. You know, and another interesting thing was that people didn't wear underwear. So there was a whole thing about how to construct something to
hold it.
hold it,
Right.
because the underwear didn't really come into being until like the 30s.
And when did the belt come into being? Do you know what I'm talking about?
With the belt?
So here's the thing you probably don't know about. Sanitary belts were the first sort of commercial thing that women used. And it was like an elastic belt that fit around your waist. It had hooks in the front and in the back that you would hook a pad onto. I fortunately came after that.
Oh, okay. I did not.
I came after that. But I've heard that
That was
it's-
my first experience.
it's bulky and uncomfortable.
Oh,
and
it's awful.
Right, it was sort of like wearing a diaper in a way, and it would shift under what
That
you were
moved,
wearing.
right.
Right, that moved. And you know, and the beginning Kotex ads, and now I understand why after talking to people about this, are all about nobody will ever know.
Right.
Like, how could nobody ever know? You're wearing all this
You're trying to
extra gear,
adjust things.
Right, you're adjusting things, and so I really feel that now things.
When
have
did they
developed
come
so
up
much.
with the adhesive backed?
That was in the 1970s.
70s,
And that was
okay.
a huge.
That's interesting.
That was a huge revolution, and we wrote about that as well. That one thing that's so interesting was that these huge strides in femcare development tied in with women's rights movements.
Right.
Like the first pads became
That's great.
available when women got the right to vote.
What about tampons? At what point did someone come up with that?
Do you know what? Tampons existed in the ancient world. People would use rolls of papyrus